All right, so I'd like to introduce who I'll be speaking to up here. We're talking about home mining for fun and profit. So Zack, Bomsta, why don't you go ahead and head on up? And Michael Schmid. All right, so this is our first time meeting each other, obviously. We're talking about home mining for fun and profit. But we just got together and we're going to hijack that a little bit. So we want to talk about why home mining is fun, but also very important for the radical decentralization of Bitcoin. So before we get into that, let's talk about a little bit about who you guys are and what your background is and the projects you're working on. So Zack, I'll toss it to you first.
Okay.
Keep it short. Remember, we have 30 minutes, so tell us about your background.
Cool, yeah. So small town boy from Idaho, electrical engineer by trade. Started a company in college that I took public, worked at it for 9 years, took it public at a $1.4 billion valuation, and then went on sabbatical and fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And while down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I came across Tech Engineer and the rest of the pleb miner community and saw that just all the advantages that come from home mining. And based on some past experiences I had in my previous company where we were kind of rug pulled and shut down hardcore by regulators with no recourse, I saw that there was this existential need to hyper decentralize Bitcoin mining, primarily because at the time when I was falling down the rabbit hole, I was seeing all this FUD around how Bitcoin mining was going to boil the oceans. And after having gone through this experience of having a $1.4 billion company doing $120 million in revenue just get shut down overnight by a regulatory body with no recourse, it made me realize the EPA can come and do the exact same thing to all these publicly traded miners, right? They're an easy target. We're boiling the oceans. We got to shut it down. And so while I'm on sabbatical, enjoying making up for long lost time with my family, I've got this thing gnawing at the back of my mind of like, wait a minute, there's an attack vector here. There's a vulnerability for these large miners, and we've got to address it. We need to hyper decentralize Bitcoin mining. And so started down this journey with a mission to hyper decentralize. That's me.
Michael, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, originally from Switzerland. Got in contact with Bitcoin probably like in 2011. Had no idea about money, how broken it is, so completely ignored it. And then fell into the rabbit hole again after I moved to the US because I have a garage and the garage is cold. And I was like, let's heat the garage with miners. Realized how loud they are. Realized that we could make it easier with liquid cooling or immersion. And then summer came and didn't need to heat the garage anymore and realized that my water heater is sucking a lot of energy. So working with other people from the pleb community, figuring out how we can create a system, how to get the heat out of miners into water heaters. Then winter came again and the house is cold, so started to heat the whole house, bought a hot tub, started to heat the hot tub. And yeah, basically that's what we're doing today. And everybody's asking they want to do it as well. So I'm working now to basically, the end goal is to have kits that you can install in your house and heat your house with miners or get paid to shower in the end.
So when a lot of people think of mining at home, they're thinking of probably stacking KYC-free sats or something like that. But there's actually a little bit more to it. And like you're talking about with the heat reuse and recirculation, you can get more use out of the miners than just that. So let's go into a little bit about the infrastructure side of things that you guys are working on. Zack, I'll start with you. So like when most people think of mining with like an S9, they're running off like a 110 outlet or something in their house that's like easily, they don't have to upgrade the infrastructure or anything to run that machine. But then you obviously have like ASIC advancements and it gets, you get less competitive over time. Public mining companies get the new machines. But if you're stuck at home and you want to mine at home and you can only use like a certain outlet, that's limiting you in a way. So tell me a little bit about the Loki board and what you've been working on.
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting to talk about this up here, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, as these new generation miners come out, they're geared towards, the big hardware manufacturers are gearing their miners towards the large corporate miners that can drop the $100 million checks on new equipment, right? And it makes sense. Like free markets would say, yeah, you go chase the most lucrative customer, right? And it's left the plebs behind. And so coming into this space, I realized that if we're going to be serious about maintaining a healthy or growing the home mining ecosystem, like we've got to break down that barrier of 220 volts because It's just that barrier is just a little too high, a little too far for most people. And so when I was getting into the space, I was actually this close to going and putting in my own 200 electrical engineer background, right? So I was like, okay, no problem. I can install my own 220 volt outlet. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's probably 1 million plus other people out there that are in the same situation I'm in, where they don't have access to 220 volts in their home. We've got to I've got to solve this problem a different way. And so I started tinkering, started diving in, hooked up all my electrical engineering tools to the miners, sniffing on all the communication lines, and essentially hacked into the miner and found a way that I could trick the miner into hashing from 120 volts with a little $20 circuit board. I call it the Loki board, Loki being the god of the Norse god of mischief and deceit. And so
Yeah, tell us why the name.
Yeah, so I'm Norwegian heritage is my background, and I just wanted to name something after Norwegian gods. I thought it'd be cool. So Loki being the god of mischief and deceit, he's tricking the miner into hashing from 120 volt. So the big picture here is that, now home miners for a $20 circuit, and I'm not trying to show this thing. I'm more trying to push for hyper decentralization, but for a $20 circuit, you can now go and start competing. $20 circuit and some tinkering. It's not plug and play simple. Like you gotta have the drive to do it. But with a little tinkering, you can now go and start buying these miners that are the same, and be competing with the larger guys and getting access to this modern equipment. And as Michael talked about here, like putting together those kits to be able to do, that's a big part of it as well. Like making it super simple and lowering those barriers of entry for home miners.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, it's great. Like that's definitely one of the main things. Any newer generation miners needs 220, 240 volts, sometimes even 380, three-phase. Like that's even harder. Like you won't find this at home at all. And so, but what is interesting, what we see with all these big miners, they buy like the newest generations, and the lower generation miners, they're much, much cheaper. Like the price does not drop linearly. Like the newest generation miners, which maybe have 40% more hashing power, are like 10 times more expensive. So there's a huge opportunity for us to buy these older miners from the big miners, put them in houses. And the really cool thing is, even if you you have done some tests, Zack, like if you underclock them, you actually get even a better hash rate out of them, like my higher efficiency. And we at home, like we don't really have space concerns or things like that. Like if you put 3 or 4 miners in there, it doesn't make a big space difference. For the big miners, of course, if you have 100 or 200,000 miners, that's a massive difference. But for houses, so I think it's really cool that we can start using these second newest generation miners and use them at home, and specifically as not need to pay $1,000 for an electrician to come out and do all of this. Yeah.
And can I just frame up the problem a little bit here, that kind of the backdrop of why we're doing all this. So if you look at what's happened to mining over the last 5 years, it's trending, and you look at that trajectory, it's trending more and more towards centralization. And as I mentioned in my introduction, right, I think that the risk of a state agency or regulatory body coming in and putting all sorts of restrictions on public miners, it's an attack vector that we're vulnerable to right now. And so we as pleb miners, as we call ourselves, like we have this mandate that we have to hyper decentralize to avoid to limit this risk vector, or to mitigate this risk vector. And so, there have been people that have been trying to do this. There have been pleb miners out there that are doing this, but the problem is we're still going more and more centralized. So we've got to find a way. We've got to figure out a way to harness free market forces, find some force bigger than just fun and profit, to actually motivate and compel people to put a miner in their home. And I think that what Michael's doing, what I'm doing with a company called Unbound, we're trying to put together the business model and the plan for how you can go out and essentially capture market demand among pre-coiners, people that know nothing about Bitcoin. How do we go out and install miners in their home and let them use these miners in a way that is economically incentivizing to them, right? So I want to be able to go to a pre-coiner, someone that knows nothing about Bitcoin, knock on their door and say, hey, if you're willing to let me host a piece of my hyper-decentralized or my decentralized network in your house, I can lower your heating bill by as much as $200 a month and potentially pay you a $50 to $100 a month hosting fee, right? So now they know nothing about Bitcoin. They take in these miners, not going to call them miners, right? But they take in these miners, they're heating their homes or they're heating their water, they're heating their water with them. And I own the equipment. I install it in their home. They're a micro host for me. And they save hundreds of dollars a month, and they get a $50 to $100 a month hosting fee as well, right? So now, what have we done there? If we successfully execute on that, we've broken into the normie market, which is, I hate to say it, but it's thousands of times bigger than the Bitcoin maxi market, right? So now we've got 1,000 times bigger market, and we're presenting an economic incentive for them where they need to know nothing about Bitcoin. They don't have to have any convictions about the price. They see I can save $200 a month and make $100 on top of it. They don't have to know anything about Bitcoin, and now we've got free market dynamics on our side. And just to kind of size up the potential here, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a little too long here, but just to size up the potential.
Not at all. Keep going.
So you look at northern US and Canada, there are what I like to call energy arbitrage opportunities, where people are still heating with propane, even though the price of propane has done this, while the price of electricity over the last 20 years has done this. And they don't realize it because when they built their house, they propane and electricity were at parity in cost. And they don't realize that they could save hundreds of dollars a month just by switching to electricity. So we go in there, we show up, and we put these miners in and start heating their homes with electricity, essentially. Well, what's that opportunity look like? By coupling energy price information and finding, essentially, I have an AI script that can use a Google satellite image to then do image recognition and detect if there's a propane tank next to the home. So now I have a database of over 1 million homes that are heating with propane, and I can go in and I can displace that more expensive heating source, propane, with a cheaper electric source, and now the homeowners are saving hundreds of dollars a month. And the opportunity here is, a lot of people think, well, home mining's cute. It's never going to grow into anything bigger than, maybe a few exahash. And that with this database that I have, I'm seeing north of 300 exahash of untapped electrical infrastructure that's there waiting to be utilized if we can get these miners into pre-coiner homes. So it's a big opportunity, and it has some real potential to actually go out and make a difference in that centralization trajectory that I talked about.
Yeah, and I can 100% echo that. Like, I live in a small town. Like, there's 400 people there. Everybody knows that, like, I'm the crazy one with, like, they always come to me if they have electrical problems. And at one point, like, I literally told just one neighbor that, like, yeah, we're getting paid to shower now. And they're like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, there's like this Bitcoin thing. And then literally, like, days later, I get texts from other people in town that say, like, so I heard you getting paid. Like, how can I also do this? And it's exactly that. Like, they don't need to know about mining. They don't need to know about Bitcoin. They will learn. But getting into there and saying, hey, you can now get a return on how much energy you use, that's something that you say, like, why would I not do this? Like, this is a no-brainer. Sure, we need to make them really nice. We need to also provide them, because, like, in my system, every time I leave the country, it's always, like, a bit tricky, because sometimes, I get texts from my wife and say, like, 4 a.m. on Sunday, like, there's no hot water anymore. And so then, like, remotely via FaceTime, you try to teach her how to connect the 240 volts again to the water heater. So we're not there yet that it's, like, fully super simple and it doesn't look fancy and stuff, but that's what we're working on, is to get out there. And I think, like Zack said, like, this is not going to happen through massive companies that go to everybody's houses and install these water heaters. I really believe this is going to go through grassroots. We're going to find plumbers or electricians that really believe in this and install this in people's houses and basically help us orange peel them. And I'm now trying since like 5-6 years to orange peel people, and sure, you can go with the money and all that stuff, but if you go there and install something in their house and they get a return, they come back and ask more questions and say, like, wait, how does this work? How does it? And so I think that's actually a much better thing to also push hyper-Bitcoinization itself forward with hyper.
It's interesting because it brings a physical element to Bitcoin. Exactly. So when you're talking about psyoping normies, which is kind of what I'm drawing from
Trojan horsing, yeah.
Yeah, so Trojan horsing, psyoping, I like both. So it's like, you're introducing people to Bitcoin through a mechanism to where they're not, that's the Bitcoin digital, it's abstracted away. And so it's like, okay, now here's this physical thing. You can, like, tangibly start having an ROI from mining, which, let's maybe get into that a little bit. So when people think about mining at home and radically decentralizing the Bitcoin network, that can sometimes come off as like podcast utopianism. And so, like, why is that actually important? Why is that actually feasible? We have, 40, 50% of hash in North America now. So Like, why is this actually decentralizing the network if you're still under like an ISP in the US?
So I think the first part of your question, why is that? Why is it feasible, right? We've got great corporations that have really fine-tuned mining operations. Like, what chance do a bunch of grassroots plebs have at building the mining network when they have all the they have economies of scale? They can go out and get like first access to the most efficient miners. So why is it feasible? And the answer is simple. And it's because we're finding useful needs for the heat. We're recycling the heat, right? If we can find a good place for that heat, an economical advantage for that heat, then it becomes feasible. That large miners right now don't have that advantage, right? They've got all these other advantages. There's no way that you're going to be able to go and compete against all those other advantages unless you find a different advantage that they don't have access to. So that's why it becomes feasible. I'll let you address how are we actually decentralizing if we're still under the same ISP in the US?
So the really big risk is that these big companies, they go to the government. Let's say you go to Texas and you say, hey, Texas is great. I want to have all these incentivations. I want to be part of these programs. Maybe even you get tax incentives for being miners to work on these systems. But then you basically go in bed with the government in some way or another. And the government right now, they did not figure out Bitcoin yet. Like, that's not, like, we're not there yet that they understand that, like, this, if this really takes off, that this is becoming the future system that governments are gonna maybe not fight with each other, but they're gonna like play with each other. Like, it's like if you go to the South Chinese Sea, like it's always governments that like try to show a force, and the same is gonna happen on Bitcoin as well. And what could happen, for example, is that the U.S. government suddenly says, oh, all the miners that are in bed with us, you're now not allowed to transact or to mine any of these transactions for these specific UTXOs. So we can say like, oh, Russia, like, you're not gonna mine, and that's gonna hurt the network. Now, some people say, well, but this is just going to delay the transactions and things like that. And that's true. No individual government will be able to completely take this over. But now let's talk about the UN or the NATO together suddenly do the same. So there's all this risk that because these big companies go and get all these incentivizations, now they are dependent on these centralizing factors. And they could use this. They could use this in some way.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, this isn't some like pie in the sky dystopian future. I lived through this experience, right? Again, $1.4 billion company, $120 million a year in revenue. And the government regulators came in with punity and over a small, and just to kind of clear my name a little bit, we had been working with this government agency for 6 years. It was the FDA. We applied for FDA medical device clearance, and they told us 6 years prior that we didn't need medical device clearance. We got the director of digital health there told us, you don't need medical device clearance, you're good. And then they come in 6 years later and shut us down. So this isn't some dystopian, like governments can come in with punity, and if it's easy enough for them to go after the large centralized nodes, so to speak, whereas it's too politically expensive for governments to go in and shut down everybody that's heating their home with a miner. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? So how do we decentralize? Yes, we're still under the same U.S. ISP, but government's too politically expensive for them to go home to home, door to door. In the case of my previous company, we had 1.5 million units in the field when we were shut down. The government didn't go to each one of those individual users that loved the product and said you have to stop using it. They went straight to the centralized entity and shut them down. So I think it's when I say hyper decentralization, it's both geographically, to the individual residential home level, but it's also legal entity wise, right? For them to go and attack every legal entity that is at a residential home is just unfeasible.
And one thing to your first answer that I want to add is like these big mining companies out there, they're really highly dependent on the Bitcoin price. Like, the halving is coming up in April next year, and from one day to another, all these companies will make half the revenue from one day to the other. And you can hear them starting to be scared. Like, if you listen to the shareholders' calls of like the big miners, these questions are coming up, and they ask like the CEOs of these big mining companies, like, what are you doing against this? And it's like, we can't do anything. Like, the only thing we can do is shut off the less efficient miners on that day if the Bitcoin price is not higher at that specific point. And we see the hash rate going up right now. So every miner is already struggling today, even before the halving. And what is really cool for us, like as home miners, we don't care. Because if I heat my house, let's say the water heater, and I pay, let's say, $100 to heat that water every month. And if I do it with a miner, I pay again $100. Like, it doesn't go up. because the miner converts 100% of the electricity into heat. The same amount as your electrical water heater also converts the same amount of heat into, or the same amount of electricity into heat. So on the halving, I'm not losing money, I'm just making less money. While for these big miners, they're gonna lose money because I don't think they have 50% or more profitability right now with all this. And so I think it's gonna be an interesting April next year, to see what's gonna happen. And I think we're there to buy all their old miners from them to put them in our houses.
I don't know where you guys want to take it. Do you guys want to touch on maybe the ASIC resale market at all, or?
Yeah, just to touch on that point, it's interesting because, if you don't have a model that reuses that heat like Michael's talking about, you live and die by efficiency. And so if you're not running the most efficient miners, you're losing money. And so you're willing, because of that dynamic, you're willing to pay a premium on it for efficiency. So like Michael was saying at the beginning, that's where you start getting the most efficient miners have this huge 10x premium on them on a cost per terahash basis. If you go back, we're at the S21 now, right? You go back a couple generations to the S19. I mean, I'm seeing deals for $4 a terahash, right? Like, I can go buy these S19s at $4 a terahash. Sure, they're only 34 joules per terahash efficient, but I don't care about efficiency because I'm not paying for the electricity. The homeowner is, and they're happy to do so because they're saving money every month, right? So there is this unique opportunity we have to get cheap access. Again, another advantage that we can leverage. They have this opportunity to get really cheap hash rate, really cheap price per terahash, and then with a little creativity and coupling it with the right business model, we can take all that old equipment that no one wants and scale it into, like I said, 300 exahash.
So we got about 5 minutes left. Maybe, do you guys have anything to say about like why business models are important as well in this? So it's not just about being a pleb miner at home. We need to have both. We need to have the public mining companies. We need to have the home miners. We also need to have that Goldilocks zone, kind of like the Bob Burnett companies that are going in the 5, 10 megawatt range. Anything you guys want to say about business models and how that helps secure the Bitcoin network?
So, yeah, I look at, I'm a little hesitant here because I don't want to be dissing on any of the previous efforts and attempts, but we have to kind of look ourselves in the mirror and say that we have failed to hyper decentralize the Bitcoin mining network. For whatever reason, we failed. The dynamics are there to favor the economies of scale, right? And so if we're serious about hyper decentralizing the network, we need bigger forces. Like I said earlier at the beginning, or alluded to at the beginning of this panel, we need bigger forces than just Bitcoin mining is fun. Home mining is fun. We need actual economic incentives and business models that make sense, that allow us to harness free market forces. Free market forces are the most powerful forces in the world, right? Like, think of all the incredible achievements that have been unlocked by free market forces. And so I don't think just going in with a passion for fun and tinkering, I mean, it's obviously needed, but it's not enough to just have that tinkering passion. Like, you have to couple it and harness it to free market forces so that you can then have a chance to go and compete with this incredibly competitive market that is Bitcoin mining, right? There's no way that as a home miner, unless you're reusing that heat and unless you have a compelling business model that harnesses those free market forces, there's no way you're going to be able to compete with the very well capitalized and very well run machines of the larger miners.
One of the things I think is incredibly interesting is just the innovation that comes from the pleb community, and specifically on the tinkering point you just hit. It's like, the large public mining companies, the innovation is almost happening at the grassroots level, like the heat reuse. And I'm seeing it in these Telegram groups, and it's like, okay, now this is actually where the public mining companies are going to get some of their ideas. Crazy what you guys are doing. Love it. Thank you guys so much for what you're doing.
You're welcome.
Is there anything you guys want to end on before we break?
I mean, the only thing I want to say is, like, we're talked about heat reuse a lot. You can do the whole thing also with cooling. Like, that's the next thing I believe. Is like, you can also cool your house with Bitcoin miners. And I think if we figure that out, it's going to take a couple of years. But yeah, at one point, I think it doesn't matter if you heat or cool. You're going to have a miner in your house, and you're going to help decentralize the system. That's what we're working on towards. It's going to happen. If anybody wants to help, talk to us. I feel like there's, like I said, this is just, like you said, this is no companies. This is just people in Telegram groups. So we need as many people that want to help. I have a couple of S9s at home that I don't need anymore. If anybody wants one, I will ship you one. It's all about, try out, play with it, break them. I broke so many miners already, but you learn and you share.
Yeah, it's so important. Like just having the ability to just get a $150 S9 right now, plug it in your garage, be up and running in an hour, and then be able to scale that actually into a business. And that's kind of my story. We haven't gone into that at all. But I started as a home miner, S9. Now we're over a megawatt. So it's like, okay, there's a lot you can do from just tinkering. Yeah. So maybe we can. Sorry. Go ahead.
I would just end with anyone that's listening that's thinking about getting in the mining space, like find that spark of curiosity and foster it. And like it sucks you in, and you start having all these ideas, and like there's so much power in lots of creative minds focusing on a problem. Like, how do we branch out and get as many people involved to solve these problems as possible? So get involved. Buy a $100 S9. Join the Home Mining Wizards group on Telegram, or Air-Cooled Mining Gorilla Maximus. I think I see Steve over there. He's got his channel. But yeah, get involved. It's a fun world. It's an innovative world, and there's a bigger vision at play here. Come for the fun, stay for the revolution.
So I'm going to end it on a little bit of a hash rate predictions. By the halving.
By the halving.
I would just say I don't care. I don't care what it does, because I'm not paying for the electricity. Like, come what may, we're going to keep heating homes and earning Bitcoin. How's that for a cop-out answer?
I like that answer.
I mean, I can drop out the number. I think we're going to get to 500-600.
By April?
Yeah. But
Bullish.
what is more interesting for me is how much are we going to drop afterwards. And I think we're going to see 300 again. So that's going to be a fun month right after the halving. But like I said, we don't care. Happy to take all the sats on the miners.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Oh, hi. Do you have your ticket to the next Pacific Bitcoin Festival? Join us as we shine a light on the best of Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. Visit pacificbitcoin.com for the best deal on tickets now.